Hi, everybody. Welcome to Mentally Speaking. I'm your host, John Nevitt, and today we're going to be talking about hallucinations, and we might dip our toes in a bit of psychosis along the way. So, what is a hallucination? Well, it's when you perceive something you see or hear to be real when it's not. And what is psychosis? Psychosis, simply speaking, is when you lose touch with reality. And when we talk about mental illness and some of the underlying factors that contribute to hallucinations, they're very similar to some of the things that I fight with every day: lack of sleep, dehydration, stress, and very focused or strong thinking. And I know those things are triggers for me, and I'm sure that they are triggers for some of you. And I think it's very interesting how those things kind of cross between parts of mental illness when we talk about having hallucinations. But I have two examples for you today, one auditory and one visual, to share with you from my experience. And the first one is auditory. And when I was trying to think of this example to share with you today, I chose it from very early on in my experience with mental illness, and I had no therapist, and I had no psychiatrist, and I had no medication to fall back on at that time. And on this particular evening, my wife had taken the kids to a party or some kind of engagement. I can't really recall, but I was on the sofa, and I was probably channel surfing at the time, and I remember hearing something from upstairs, and I turned down the television to see if I could make out what it was. And sure enough, I was hearing something from just above me, from my son's bedroom. So I turned the television down all the way to see if I could hear it clearer. And I heard two voices. And I could make out about every fourth word. When you're hearing voices through a wall, it sounds like when you quiver, it's kind of muffled, as though someone were covering their mouths. But I knew that they were there, planning to kill me and to hurt my family. And that is when I lost touch with reality. That is when the hallucination became more than just perceiving something to be real when it wasn't. That's when psychosis took over. So, knowing that there were only two of them upstairs, I ran upstairs to my son's bedroom and threw open the door, and there was no one there. But I heard voices now coming from my youngest daughter's room, and I guess they heard me coming. I thought, wow, these guys are fast. So I ran to her room, threw open the door, and there was no one there. Now I heard them coming from my oldest daughter's room at the end of the house. And I thought, well, I can get them now. So I ran down there and opened the door. There was no one there. So you can imagine I did this running around all evening until my wife and kids came home. And then when they came home, the noises that they made running up the stairs, calling my name, my wife calling my name, telling me they were home, was the perfect distraction technique. My mind could no longer compete with that kind of noise, with that kind of noise coming in that I had to process. It just couldn't compete with it. So the hallucination was over, and the psychosis had ended. However, I still felt that there had been someone in the house, and my wife had to talk me out of it, as she did quite a few times. She was very good at that. And now let's talk visual hallucinations. Even after all these years, I still have them. I will say they don't surprise me as much as they used to, but they are an inconvenience. But I will say, the one I chose to share with you today, I think you'll find was both a surprise and an inconvenience. But I will go on. I remember I was in my bathroom one morning, and I went in to get ready for the day, and I put my toothpaste on my toothbrush, and I looked up to brush my teeth, and there he was, standing behind me, staring at me like he was going to kill me. Now, to give you a little perspective, I was in intensive therapy 3 times a week. I had a psychiatrist, and I was on medication. So I knew when I saw him that I had to test this particular hallucination. So I took something from the counter. I can't recall what it was. And I spun around to do whatever damage I could to him. And of course he wasn't there. And I turned back around to the mirror, and there he was again. So this test was a little unnerving, to say the least. I didn't finish getting ready for the day that morning, and I spent weeks trying to cope with this man in the mirror. I spent weeks trying to use the coping skills that I had learned to rid myself of him. And I had tested, and I knew that he wasn't real. So he, I suppose, may have been classified more as a vision. But he was there nonetheless. So it was my job to get rid of him, and I battled my mind to rid myself of him. And the more I did, the more I realized that the more stressful it became. So one day, I realized that he was there to try to keep me from something. He was there to try to keep me from getting ready for the day, to try and keep me unclean, unshaven, unkempt, to try to keep me on the sofa or back in bed, back in my depression. And I wasn't going back. So I decided that the only way to really cope with this man was to make him part of my morning routine and to color outside the lines a little bit. So I did. Every morning I would go into my bathroom and I would put my toothpaste on my toothbrush, and I would see him and I would say, "Hey, how you doing? Oh, it's good to see you." And I would brush my teeth, and I would talk about my kids. I could talk about them for hours. They're fabulous. I'd talk about my wife and kids. "Oh, yeah, we're doing great." And of course, he didn't talk. But it would get me through my routine because I drew him into the fold, made him a part of it. And then I'd put all my things away, and I'd say, "See you tomorrow." And I'd get about my day. And one morning, my wife called in from the bedroom, and she said, "Hey, who are you talking to?" And I was standing there, and I thought, oh, my God. And I looked around, and I said, "George?" And I heard her say, "Oh, great. we're going to need to talk about that. And I said, okay. And I found that after that, I started to see George a little bit less and less, and that my stress level went down a little more and more, possibly because I had tipped the scales somehow, because George suddenly had a name. He wasn't just this thing anymore. And the more I dealt with him, the less stress I had. And he was no longer necessary to be there in my bathroom, or in my mirror, or in my mind. And then, soon after that, he was gone. Now, I leave the hows and the whys to men and women far smarter than I. But I will say that sometimes, if the standards don't work for you, you may have to color outside the lines and make up your own ways of dealing and coping with what it is you have to deal with. And now that we are talking about dealing and coping with some of our hallucinations, I have to pause for a moment, because I would be remiss if I didn't mention that if you do have a psychiatrist, and if you are on medication, please be sure to take your meds. That is something I can't stress enough. It's extremely important every day to take your meds. Don't try to be your own psychiatrist. Don't try to regulate them yourself. If you have questions about them, go to your doctor. But by all means, take the meds that are prescribed to you. It's extremely important. I take mine every day. And now, let's go over some of the common distraction techniques for visual hallucinations. And one you'll find, or two you will find, are similar to the auditory ones. And the first one is obviously change your environment. You know, that's one of the big ones. If you're having a particular visual hallucination somewhere, and you can simply fix it by changing your environment, do so. If you have to leave a party, then you apologize to the host and take your leave. You know, go home. But change your environment, and that works almost every time. And there are many other ways. Again, another great one is read a book. Get your eyes in that book and read a book. Let your mind wander in the imagination of what it is you're reading, rather than wandering around an empty room. That's a wonderful one. Or delve into your favorite movie, The Godfather. And I know that's what it is. Or at least it should be. And it probably will be as soon as you see it. So get yourself watching that one. It's a classic, and you'll love it. But those are just a few, and you can look up online to see distraction techniques for visual hallucinations, and there are literally hundreds that can help you out. And I see, once again today, I'm getting the wrap-up signal from the corner over here. And I will say, if you feel you got a little something out of this episode today, then give us a like or subscribe and make it easier for others to find us. And I'm so glad that you joined me here today. And I'll be back with you very, very soon. And in the meantime, I'm John Nevitt. I wish you love, I wish you hope, and I wish you health and happiness. mentally speaking. Bye-bye.